Get off the marketing roller coaster and get on the automated fast track to digitally market your brand everywhere now. Join podcast producer Tom Hazard and Inc. columnist Tracy Hazard as they share easy content building formulas and smart cut secrets proven to fuel hundreds of blogs, podcasts, and brands with bingeable original content. Join the conversation on how to get your message out to the world. Be original. Be heard. Promote with power and purpose. Feed your brand.
Hey everyone, welcome to Feed Your Brand. I'm Tracy Hazard, and I am bringing you an interview on Feed Your Brand, which is a little unusual. We don't normally do a lot of interviews over here on Feed Your Brand. We do them on the Binge Factor all the time, right? That's what the Binge Factor is all about, successful interviews with podcasters. And I've had this guest on over at the Binge Factor before. In fact, I was his 99th guest interview. So he had been guesting on shows. And since then, he's done about 300 interviews. So he's certainly a seasoned expert at being a part of the interview. But the reason I'm bringing him over here on Feed Your Brand and creating this sort of crossover episode, if you will, is because I want to introduce you to something that Mark Herschberg, that is our guest today, has introduced, and it's called the Brain Bump app. And so I wanted to give you some exposure about that and have some understanding about what he's created, why he's done it, and what that is all about. So let me tell you a little bit about Mark, because you may not have listened to the Binge Factor episode yet. So Mark Herschberg is the author of the Career Toolkit, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You, and creator of the Brain Bump app. From tracking criminals and terrorists on the dark web to creating marketplaces and new authentication systems, Mark has spent his career launching and developing new ventures at startups and Fortune 500s and in academia, with over a dozen patents to his name. He helped to start the undergraduate practice opportunities program dubbed MIT's Career Success Accelerator, where he teaches annually. At MIT, he received a BS in physics, a BS in electrical engineering and computer science, and a master's in engineering and electrical engineering and computer science, focusing on cryptography. So he's got a pretty cool background. At Harvard Business School, Mark helped create a platform used to teach finance at prominent business schools. He also works with many nonprofits, currently serving on the board of Plant a Million Corals. He is one of the top-ranked ballroom dancers in the country and now lives in New York City, where he's known for his social gatherings, including his annual Halloween party, as well as his diverse cufflink collection. As you can see, he's such an interesting person. He definitely makes a great interview. And that's something that I, hope you enjoy along the way. Of course, Mark and I have known each other a bit of time as we've explored various things. And he's going to talk about Podmatch and some other apps and some other things that he's been using to successfully guest. So he's going to give you some insights into that. But most importantly, I want you to pay attention to how he's talking about his creation, the Brain Bump app, and why he created it, because it might be something that might be a tool for you, because it helps to pull out amazing quotes and inspirational messages from any kind of content, podcasts included. So let's hear from Mark, and I'll talk to you on the other side. Mark, I'm so glad to catch up with you again. And now you have over 300 episodes under your belt as a guest, and you're on my show again. And I love that. And, it is so easy to talk to a pro, but you've got some really cool learnings and things that you have developed because of all this guesting, because of how hard it is to market a book. Tell me a little bit about your journey of the book into the app.
Thank you for having me back. It is a pleasure to be here. I had such fun on our last episode, which was my 99th. So I've been pretty busy since then. When I created the book, I was having a conversation with my neighbor who's a marketer, and she said, "You should build an app." I said, "Oh, okay. What should the app do?" I said, "I don't know, build an app." Great, not helpful. But it did get me thinking. I thought about what would an app do? Now, the early apps for books were simply taking the PDF and wrapping it as an app and putting it online. No one wants that. And now we have Kindles, so we don't need that. So I started to think, what might be useful? What would you need the app to do? And I have a background, not only as an author, but I'm a CTO. I'm a chief technology officer. So I built software. I have worked in education, having taught at MIT for over 20 years. And I've worked in digital media. And I started thinking about all these different aspects and experiences. And when you put all together, there's a really interesting opportunity that has not been really identified and addressed yet. As a reader or a podcast listener or anyone who consumes nonfiction content, you read a book like mine and you say, okay, well, this is great. So many good tips. I love this. And then you forget them because we're busy. As soon as you're done with the book, you move on. You do something else. That podcast episode you heard 2 weeks ago, it was on something, but I don't know if I remember what the key point was.
Sometimes I remember the story, but that's about it. I usually can't even identify the guest's name or anything like that at that point, right? It's too far gone.
Exactly. And that, by the way, is why people use stories, because stories help make it more memorable. Now, this isn't good for the reader or the listener because I just put all this time into listening or reading and I forgot most of it. That's not very efficient. I wish I could read and remember it. From the content creator standpoint, we of course want people to remember it first and foremost because we put it out there to help people. I did all this work to help you. That's a shame if it's not. But also many people who write business books or have podcasts, they're building a brand and they're putting it out because they want to build that brand recognition and of course, drive people to know their brand better and maybe get additional services. Well, if they forgot about your book or podcast, that's not really helping you either. So how do we help people remember? There is a well-known technique, we've all heard of it, spaced repetition. And if you don't know the words, you know what it means. That was your teacher saying, hey, before the test, open your book once or twice between now and then and review it, or look back over your notes. Don't just look at once and then hope you remember on the test. Over a spaced period, repeat the content, look at your notes. One way we've all done this is as flashcards. Oh, flashcards, right? And that's how you memorize your times tables.
Oh, I've been in that with my 8-year-old. We're doing that right now.
I still remember back in 4th grade doing it. I loved it. It was fun. But still, flashcards we did in school. No one's doing it now. Some people might take notes on their books. That's rare. But even the ones who do, if you ask them, they never look at the notes. They just take the notes.
So I'm going to stop you there because I'm a journaler. Like I have journals with me all the time, but because I moved to the Kindle when I read books and, you've been on 300 episodes, but I read about 300 books a year. So it's a lot of books that I'm consuming. And I stopped caring because now I could read later into the evening when Tom falls asleep and I could just check, be reading my book, but there's no way I could have the light on to journal. So I discovered this kind of issue of that. And I really do love the features in my Kindle of the highlighting and notes because but they're cumbersome to type in there. But highlights, at least, what I loved is that they compile them. And that's what I think is so unique about where you're going with this is that actually helps me. And I actually do refer to it because it's so searchable, where my notes were like, flip through the journal and try and remember where I wrote it down. Now, luckily, I have one of those kind of memories where because I wrote it down, I do remember better than if I didn't write it down at all. But I still have to go find it. And so where this way you're searching through it. So I'm so interested about that idea of that sensory side of things not occurring for you, but you still need a recall place. So how'd you resolve that?
So most people, when they take notes, they don't actually go back and look. You are one of the exceptions. And it's gotten a little easier. We can at least do a search when the notes are digital.
Right.
But still, we'd like a way to make them more accessible. And here's the other thing. Flashcard apps have existed. You could put them into your flashcard app, but no one wants to sit there and open a flashcard app. So he said, this is what's missing. And this is what I really thought someone must have built this. And so I looked for software to do this for my book, and what didn't exist, we filed a patent on this and now built Brain Bump. One of the key things it does is it takes the content, it takes those highlights, and it does a passive push to you. So for example, if you just got promoted to be a new manager and you've got a 3:00 meeting with your team, you're going to set a notification at 2:55. And so as you've got your phone, it's going to give you one of those push notifications that has a tip from, say, a management book or a management podcast. Go, oh, right, that's a really good tip. Remember to
I'm going to open my meeting with that.
And then swipe, done, swipe it away. It took you 2 seconds. And the key was no one wants to open their app. So getting these passive pushes, you go, oh, right, good tip each day. And by getting it over and over at a time you set, it helps you retain it. It's like the flashcards happen automatically. Now, there's other modes too. You can say, ooh, I'm about to walk into a networking event. Let me pull up those networking tips because I need them all right now. So you can use it in the active seeking method as well. But the passive push method is really the thing that just has not existed on the market.
Yeah, I love that idea of it just reminding you and being there. It's something that we've talked about in podcasts because we do video memes and clips and audiograms and little short sound bites. And we do tweetables on our blogs, right? But it's all coming from there. And some of them are so profound and amazing. And yet they're not being captured anywhere, that no one's sitting there writing them down, because when you're listening to a podcast, it's even more passive than the book. You're not going to be highlighting. So I think that's such an interesting concept that you've got here that needed to have a solution.
And really what it comes down to is a larger change that we're going to see across all content. Historically, we have delivered content in a linear format. The book, start to finish. Podcast, you don't start a podcast at a random spot in the middle. You might miss something. You got to go start to finish. Even TVs, movies, a lot of video games that have some type of episodic theme to it, there is an order, there's a sequence. But in fact, the information we need, the when and where we need it, is often nonlinear. Tomorrow at 4:57 p.m., I might need a tip from page 302 of my book, or I might need something that was in minute 17 of a podcast I heard 2 weeks ago. I don't know exactly when and where I'll need it. And having it constrained into these linear formats isn't very useful.
No, it's really not. You're so right about that. I had this great mentor who used to say that, you're at a lecture, you're reading a book, you're doing these things, and, it's like you're getting a whole bunch of sand in your hand and you want to shake it out till you get to the diamonds that relate to you, right? And that's what you're going to then take a grip on. But even still, we all have to develop techniques for figuring out how to hold on to those diamonds, whether it's notebook, whether it's, improving our memories, which some of us could use, right? Like there's not been a system or assistance in helping to do that. And that's really what Brain Bump is.
Right. And that's really a reflection of the technology we've had. With a book, well, you have to bind the pages in some order. You have to pick the order. Normally page 3 comes after page 2. On the VHS tapes that we had growing up, well, I have to start at the beginning and scroll through to get to the end. Now that things are more digital, we can start to access them in a non-linear fashion, but then we still need some type of deeper, better indexing or other ways to pull out the pieces. And so the way I describe is this app, it's the first of what will be, I'm sure, a series of tools created by our company, by other companies, that really take the content, put it in a blender and mix it up and spit it out in a non-linear way. And this is how we're going to be accessing content in the future.
I love this. My brain works like this. So you've really tapped into something that, helps me add organizational, add searchability to it, but also add some shortcuts to it, because that's really, I think, also important, is that as the content creator, sometimes you want to make sure your audience doesn't miss something that's critical. So we have the ability to set some of those things ahead of time in Brain Bump, so that we're saying, hey, this is something you want to highlight. It's like what we do with a tweetable in our blogs. We're creating something where we're saying, this is important. This is something you should remember, especially if you're new to this, you may not realize it yet.
That's exactly right. Now, one of our principles in creating Brain Bump is laziness.
I love it. You built in laziness as part of the model. I love it.
So we want to make it as easy for everyone. There are other apps where you can take notes from books, for example, but that means you, the reader, have to do it. Or as you point out, for podcast listeners, because Brain Bump supports books, podcasts, blogs, and classes or lectures, well, that means you, the reader, or you, the listener, has to do it. And of course, podcasts made people listen in their cars or while they're at the gym. They're not taking notes. So we have the content creator provide the highlights. And this also means, as a content creator, this is your content. You control how much, how little you want to put in there. Unlike some of the other apps where people, like the book summary apps, where people say, oh, I'm going to summarize your book whether you like it or not. No, this is your content. You control what and how you put in there. And then the user gets to be lazy and say, well, here's your 100 key points. And you know what? I like these 5. So I'm going to favorite those, ignore the rest, but I don't have to record it myself. You're doing the hard work.
What you're pointing out in podcast is so difficult. So on occasion, I've needed to rewrite a client's intro, for instance, and it's 30 seconds long. Sometimes I might have to replay it while I'm writing down what they're saying, about 10 times just to get it quoted right. And then I'm like, oh, and now I'm going to edit it. Now I'm going to rewrite the whole thing and we'll have it re-recorded. I could go and have it transcribed, but that's so difficult for clients, for your listeners to be able to do. It's just so difficult. It's why we have our transcription blogs, though, so that they could go and highlight it, copy and paste it from there. But still, it's an effort. You got to get off of the media you're on and go into something else, and then you'll go record. And that's a lot of work to expect a listener or a reader to do. So by having this all pre-done, now it's so interesting. So what if I haven't read the book yet? and I'm seeing these things. How do you think it's going to lead to more book sales? Because they're like, wow, that quote just got served up to me. And that sounds really interesting. Are you going to serve up quotes that are similar to this? So like if I highlighted something or I favorited one of those quotes and they're say, oh, and here's 5 others.
There's a couple different ways people can use this. And we'll have to see what resonates how much with different audiences. So one is certainly once you've experienced the content, if you read my book, I recommend get this content because it's going to reinforce it. It's going to help you remember it. And that makes me happy. It means I'm more helpful to you. But look, if you're not certain about the book yet, well, you can also download the content, check it out. I say, wow, this sounds like great advice. Reading the book, I think, will make it more valuable. And I realize there's someone out there, there's someone who says, oh, $20 for the book, that's really expensive for me. If I can get some of the highlights without it, okay, you know what? I may have lost a sale there, but that was a marginal sale. My guess is others will say, these tips are very valuable. I want to really understand the context for them. And additionally, by being top of mind each day, that's going to drive the word of mouth marketing. So I think that will help.
That's going to definitely help. Yeah. And this is what I think it's short-sighted of, and I hear this from authors a lot, I would say. Not podcasters have a little bit more of that sort of freeware version. Freeware world is the way podcasting works. So they're a little more open to it. But I hear it from authors. It's like, yeah, I don't want to tell you that because it's in the book and you should buy the book, right? But the reality is that I probably wouldn't have bought it anyway. Like if I'm that person who was just going to go skip I wouldn't have bought it. And if I did, I wouldn't have read it, which wouldn't have benefited you. But if I get your quote and then I share that with somebody else and that person is a reader, now you've got a sale. So I actually think that word of mouth is going to lead to more sales in the long run.
And, as a podcast guest, that was a conscious choice. Do I only say, these are the 5 stories I'll tell, and then the rest go buy the book? I thought, you know what? I'm just going to talk about anything. I will give away every and any tip if it comes up in the conversation. And if you want to listen to my 300 podcasts instead of buying the book, feel free. That's a lot of time.
And it's all non-linear in that particular format
Exactly.
too, right? It's not in the order you might need it.
But now the other ways people will likely engage with the content, you might say, hey, here's a podcast. I've heard about this. I can look at the highlights and, oh, that's a really good quote from that podcast. You know what? I want to listen to that episode. And so we can drive plays. And so it's a way for people to explore, because how often does someone say, well, I think I want to listen to this podcast. And so they hit play, podcast they haven't experienced before. And the first couple minutes might be, it's the introduction, and then there might be a plug for whatever the brand is. And then they do the warm up. They're not getting to the real value. And after 4 minutes, they're going, okay, this is boring. But by seeing that tip first, by going nonlinear, they say, okay, I know there is that diamond in the sand. So I'm going to listen to this episode so we can drive plays. And then, as you suggested, as we get more usage and more data, we can start to suggest recommended content, other podcasts, books, and blogs based on what you like.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So in other words, if maybe it was a quote out of the book, but you also then expanded on it and told more stories in another podcast, so you could add additional supplemental content in the future. I love that idea. That would be very valuable. I was getting me thinking as though when you were talking about the lazy model, right? So I'm the kind of person who doesn't like to re-listen to her own show. So like I don't want to go back and listen to it to pick the quotes. I don't want to go back to my book and re-skim it to figure out where the quotes and highlights will be. Is there an easy way to do that? Do you have a recommendation for how someone should do that if they didn't do it the first time, right? Like as you're creating it, now all creators out there, as you're doing it, make notes.
That's exactly right. And that, by the way, is something I learned to do with all my podcast episodes as a guest. Right afterwards, let me make some notes, because when I have to promote this on social media 6 weeks from now, what the heck did we talk about? So I better take those notes now. Unfortunately, going back, I went through my whole book. I went through my whole blogs and just pulled out the highlights. You can, if you're on Kindle, you can see what are the things people have been highlighting. That might give you an indication. You could look at maybe some things people have tweeted, some quotes that they've used in the past. Unfortunately, there is no easy way. We don't have artificial intelligence to just magically pull out all your.
Well,
your good
there are
points.
some, like there's Jasper.ai, and there is lately.ai, but they're cumbersome because you have to train them for what they're looking for. So otherwise you get like, anytime they're like, oh, that looks like a sentence that sounds like something that would be like, it pulls up almost too much stuff for you to go through at the end of the day. And that's the problem with those AI tools, is unless you're going to train them, or unless every book, every piece of content is always in the same, sort of keyword category, you won't be able to get it trained well enough. It's taken me, we use Lately, and it's taken me, my team and I, about 18 months. I'd say we're probably headed into 18 months of training it. And everything that we do is focused on how to podcast tactics, stuff like that. And so we're really narrow and tight, and it's still taken us a long time to get to a place where we can get 10 good options and go, okay, we'll pick the 5 best one out of that. But before, it was like hundreds of choices, and it was more work than listening to the episode.
And this, by the way, is why general artificial intelligence is a long way off.
It's a long way off. I agree.
But here's what you can do in the theme of laziness. To make it easy, you can just upload a spreadsheet to the server with your tips. So what we recommend you do is go through your backlog of content, go through your book or your old podcast episodes, and it's some work to pull out the highlights. This, you could say, is what interns are for, or what some labor overseas is for, where you can hire them for $15, $20 an hour. You pull it out, you put it into the spreadsheet. Now you can upload that spreadsheet to our server, but you also now have a catalog of all the key points. That is your social media for the next couple months. That is stuff that you can sprinkle into talks that you do. That gives you an idea of maybe blog topics if you have a podcast. It's whatever medium you have, you can take these key points. Don't just use it on our app, use it elsewhere, repurpose it. Be lazy. You did the work once, use it multiple places.
Use it in a lot of places. So now if I'm in Brain Bump and I've got the quote already and it's my own quote, can I share that out on my social media from there?
That will be coming very shortly. So depending on the time that this episode gets released, we should hopefully have that feature in, because of course, it's not just your quote. It should be, I'm listening to your wonderful podcast. Go, wow, that's a brilliant insight. I want to share this because I have friends who like it. Also makes me look cool because I'll get a social media post. And that's, of course, going to help your content reach more people and help your brand. So
this is a tactic we teach our clients here at Podetize. So we teach our clients to go to their own blog and click all the tweetables and tweet them. So you're actually creating, making sure that, their shares are happening, but you're doing it from your own content. So this is like the lazy way to follow your lazy model. I love this. It's a lazy way to go. I don't even have to create a new post altogether. I can just share this straight out of Brain Bump and I'm done. And I've done my Instagram. I've done my Facebook for the day, I love it.
That is brilliant. So so we will help you with your social media.
It will
Just
help
go
you do the
reshare your own
share.
content. I love it.
Yeah, that sounds like so much fun, Mark. Like so many great features built in that it's going to just make this so much easier. Now, I was just, as you were talking about sort of the content capture and everything, the way that we do it here with our podcasting model is that, of course, our editors, as they're going through it, and our transcriptionists, as they're creating the blogs, they're pulling those out already. So they've already got it for our clients. So our clients already have it pre-made. All we have to do is take those tweetables and drop them in a spreadsheet for them, and it's done, and they're ready to go. They don't even have to do that work, which is kind of awesome for them. But I was thinking about my book that I'm working on, and it's like, how could I do this? I think I could get my editor to do it. So my proofreader could do it for me. So that I would, and then I could review it and just pick the ones that I was like, oh yeah, she's right. That's good. Because the other problem that I see doing it for myself, from my perspective, this is where I go wrong, is that I'm a lot more in the know than my reader, or I'm a lot more in the know than my listener. And so I sometimes forget how profound something might be when you're new to it. And so having another pair of eyes on that can be helpful.
Very well said. And to your point, now everyone should be taking their podcast and generating that blog post, generating that transcript, which, as you know, you can use a tool like Otter AI or something else, because of course you're taking your content and repurposing it into another method that has good SEO that's going to drive traffic. And that's what's great about services like yours, is that you do it for us out of the box. They go, great, it's done. I get that benefit, and it doesn't really cost me any time. I've got your wonderful team doing it. But if you've done that, if you have your blog, you can quickly skim it and pull things out. You might have prior social media posts where you did that audio clip. That's probably what you want to put in as a tip. And as you know, most importantly, having a different set of eyes is going to give you a different perspective. Think about who your audience is and get someone who represents that audience. So not your mom, not you, but someone who is in that audience to look it over and say, hey, this is really important. And certainly as an author, every author should do this. I made sure I had some readers, not my editor, not my proofreader, but content readers who would go through and say, oh, that was really insightful, or this is kind of confusing, because that made sure the book, I didn't have any bumps along the way.
That's one of my favorite parts about the Kindle version. And I was told by Shane Snow, author of Dream Teams, and he said that when the Kindle and the X-ray version came along and you could see where your readers were highlighting, it was such a great feedback loop for him. Because prior to that, you write an article, you write a book, and unless somebody specifically quotes you or came back to you and said something, you have no idea. But when you can go through that back end of it and take a look at where everybody's highlighting and have that visual, it starts to give you some aha moments as to where have I added most value and where should I be writing my next book?
That is very true. And that's something else that we have in Brain Bump, is you'll be able to see the content you put on the platform, how people are engaging with it, what content they like, what they're using. And that's going to give you insight for future books, podcast episodes, blog posts. It's going to give
social
you
media posts, right? So if you didn't post it the first time, this one you should now add to your evergreen and post frequently.
Exactly.
I love it. I love it, Mark. This is so much. So writing the book is one thing. Going out there and doing all these podcast interviews, you're a pro at that. And then now developing the app. Which one has been the most challenging for you?
I would say the app has been the most challenging. The book, as we might have talked about on the prior episode, I had been teaching this for 20 years. So I had the content, I just had to get it on paper and go through the process, and there were some bumps. The podcast, once I figured out how to get on podcasts, it became really easy. And of course, we gave some of those tips in our prior episode, which people should listen to, which I'm sure will be linked in the show notes and the blog post. So you can go back.
You are absolutely right, Mark. We will do that here.
But this one, the challenge, I'll simply say, as we're trying to get into the app stores, we are running into the challenge. One of them is pushing back on us, and they're saying, this doesn't look interesting to us. And so what we're facing, even though our market research has said, oh, these are great features, people like them, they want them, it's almost like I'm going around in 1967 saying, I have this new thing called email, and it's going to let you send these messages electronically from your computer But do we need that? Is this useful? I don't get it. This seems weird.
I just don't think that any of the app stores should be arbiters of of taste in any way, shape, or form. When I look at some of the apps on there, I think to myself, yeah, I don't know who approved that one. So,
Yeah.
if they're going to be arbitrary about it, that's shocking. So I agree with you. I think that you need to let the audience decide. You need to let that, just like we're letting our readers and our listeners decide what's a great quote. You need the app store should not be the gatekeeper on what works and what doesn't.
So that's been the biggest challenge because it's completely outside my control. For all the layout and proofreading issues I had with the book, I could go in and fix it. Here it's out of my hand. So that's
frustration. I hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you have background in tech, so it's not like these things, happen to you because you're a rookie. Like these things happen to even the most seasoned pros, and the tech hiccups, the compatibilities, the dealing with the bureaucracy of app stores, right? Like, I mean, all of that is just something that you cannot predict.
And we knew we'd put some time in the schedule because we knew there would be some bumps, but it has just been bigger. And I can tell you, because I work in tech, I know other app developers, every person I know who has tried to get some apps out, they have encountered these types of hiccups. And it is very frustrating for all of us.
Yeah, I know. I think this is sort of the mistake on the other side of things. It's like, oh, I'll just launch an app and it'll be launched the day after I submit it. Or I just put my podcast submitted it to Apple and it'll be available in 24 hours. It can be, but that doesn't happen as often as you think. So.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I am so glad you are back and actually doing more. I think this is going to give your book even more longevity, which I think is going to be an interesting case study to take a look at. So, I mean, it's, as you've discovered, because, when I met you, we were doing you had just done with me 99th interview, and now you've done over 300. So you've really got to keep working hard to promote your books. Like it's grueling as an author out there. Is there any kind of advice that you can give to authors and podcasters? Because I think we have a very similar promotion issue. It's like, we're constantly churning out things, but we still have to stay on that promotion mode.
And that's one of the other philosophies that goes into the brain bump laziness, because exactly, I need to generate new content or people forget about me. That means go out on a podcast, do a social media post, do a blog post, get new things out there, or even just take old things and put them out there. It's a lot of work. The great thing about Brain Bump is once you get your content on the server, it's fire and forget. You never have to log in again as a content creator, but you know that each day a certain number of people will be seeing your content. No one is going to social media and saying, let me look at your post from 6 months ago, unless they're a reporter trying to dig up dirt on you, maybe.
Yeah, that's a lot of work, right? I mean,
right.
Going back through your feed on Instagram is I do see that happen on occasion, but it's rare.
Yeah. So no one's looking at your old content. People probably aren't going to your old blog posts. They're probably not listening to that episode you recorded a year ago. But with this, because we've taken the time out and we put all in a non-linear format, each day they might see an idea that came out of your book from 3 years ago, or an idea that came out of your podcast episode last week. It doesn't matter. And it's all there happening automatically without any daily effort on your part. And it goes back to be lazy and get your content promoted.
So that's actually one of the kind of models, and I'm going to end this quote that I cannot remember exactly, but I'm sure if it was in Brain Bump, I would have it at a reference like this because I would favorite it. But it's basically is like when the student's ready, the teacher comes, right? And the teacher's there, right? That kind of idea is that's what you're putting out there. You're putting into Brain Bump all the teaching. So it's a pull for the student. And so they're grabbing at it and looking for it when they're ready for that. And I think that's that's my ideal, is that I always am working hard to try to make sure that my clients can be available. Our podcasts, our blog posts, everything's available in the digital world to be searched at its optimum level and be found when someone's looking for it, because it would be a total shame if someone were looking for it. And because your thing was 3 years old, your book, your blog, your podcast episode was 3 years old, even though it was perfectly relevant, doesn't show up for them. And I just don't like the idea of that. I want, it needs to be available when I'm ready looking for it. So that's really a
Exactly.
great way to keep this brain bump model moving too.
You can even think, we talked about the linear model in a book, but there's even a linear model in that RSS feed for your podcast or your blog. There's the newest, there's the oldest, and there's an order. But again, the order doesn't correspond to the order in which the user necessarily wants the content. So you've got to get in that blender. We've got to mix it up and make it available in the way that user wants it.
Wait, great. And there's always links from everything so that they can go to consume the full content. So they can go find the book, they can go find the podcast, they'll be able to consume the full content at any point from anything that they see, correct?
Exactly. There will probably be a few more links available on the Android version than the Apple version, just because Apple has more restrictions. But it's not just, well, here's the quote, that's it. It's, oh, here's the quote, click to go listen to that podcast episode. Click to go to the full blog post. Click to go get more of that content and more from that content creator.
So Mark, I just reminded me that I'm going to have to connect you up with my tech team to make sure that we're actually recording your app as one of the, so we record all apps, but we put them into a big category of other in the statistics side. So as this grows, we'll be able to measure how many podcast episodes are being listened to from, or being linked to from Brain Bump. So we'll be able to track that. That's where that came from, where that request for it came from.
You'll be able to get that even before your tech team does it, because the metrics we have on the server will already show you what type of traffic we're driving to you, but certainly go see it on your own
so you'll be able to see it in both. Well. I love it. Exactly. That's so great. Yeah. I think at the end of the day, this is what's so important, is that not only do we want to make sure that we're pushing our content out there, but we need to be effective in it, because it's a lot of work. And so we need to decide, is this worth it? Is this serving the listener, the reader? And is this serving me too, from a time and effort standpoint?
And that, of course, is the balance. The app will be free. There are lots of other apps out there where people have to pay a monthly fee. We are making it free. And the user says, wow, I am getting great free value, but to then have the content in there that makes it valuable to the reader, we have to make sure it's something for the content creator, which is driving traffic to their websites. And that's why we want to be able to measure this, because both sides need to get value, the content creators and the content consumers, and then everyone wins.
Absolutely. Well, I am so looking forward to having all of my stuff in there. I'm going to do the post commentary on this episode. It's going to come from my experience using it. So you will all get it. I'm entering my stuff, and I'm going to give some tips on my side about what I thought about, what I did, what I put in there. And then you'll be able to go check that out. But I'm also looking at using this because I'm a huge consumer of quotations that I love to get podcasters and authors and quote them when I give speeches. And so it's going to be great for me to be able to search up and try to find some new things that I'm not going to get, because every time you go to Google, you get the same quotes all the time. And I'm so tired of quoting, dead people. It'd be nice to quote a few live people actively doing this today. So,
and as we'll be adding new content all the time, there will always be new content for you to get and search through. So
awesome. So I can keep it fresh. I love it. Well, Mark, I'm so glad you've continued on your development of content, your development of promotion for your book, and been sharing that with our audience, but with others in general, with other authors, other podcasters. You've been so generous with that, and I really appreciate you for that. And I look forward to seeing how Brain Bump grows in the next year.
Well, thank you again for having me on the show. I always love coming here, and I'm looking forward to seeing all your great content from your wonderful podcasters on Brain Bump.
I told you. He's a great interview. He's a lot of fun. We've really enjoyed getting to know each other over the years. And I have done everything I can. We recorded this episode quite a few months ago, and I've done everything I can to try to get into the Brain Bump app and use it. But we've got so much going on here at Podetize that I haven't been able to do that in the way that I would like to. But it's also not my thing, right? It's really geared to authors, content creators who are trying to get people to get inspired by their tips, their messages, coaches in that sense. And that's just just not who I am. So it's not quite a right fit for what I'm trying to do right at this moment in time. I would really like to explore it to its full extent, and I just can't devote the time to it right now. So I'm going to keep this in the back burner though. And I have certainly suggested it to a few of my clients already who are in that sort of author, inspirational speaker mode, who really could benefit from having a tool like the Brain Bump app to be able to share as a part of their courses, their programs, their sales of their book. So go check it out. The Brain Bump app is available. I'm not sure if it's available on Apple yet. He was having a lot of problems last I spoke to him because Apple, the App Store, is being extremely difficult. But I know you can go to the Brain Bump app website, and so you'll be able to connect to that from Podetize's Feed Your Brand blog. So you can do that right on Podetize. Hit in the search bar, search for Brain Bump app, and it'll get you straight to the page all about this information with Mark Herschberg and how to get to the Brain Bump app. So I look forward to you exploring it and sharing with me how you've done with it. Has it worked for you? What's been happening with it? Share it with me and I'll bring Mark back on. Maybe the three of us can talk about your success with it. I look forward to that. Reach out to us. Thanks everyone for listening to Feed Your Brand. I'm Tracy Hazard, and we'll be back with more coaching, just like we always do every week on Feed Your Brand.
For more tips, tactics, and strategies, visit us online at podetize.com or on social at Podetize. Thanks for exploring the power of podcasting and how to be seen, heard, found, and rewarded in our noisy digital world. Keep on podcasting.